Hello, and welcome to this reflection for Holy Week. I'm Michael Gelder. I am the reader or lay minister in the Isle of Wedmore benefice, and I've been asked by Richard, our vicar, to produce a short video with a reflection on Holy Week. Now, he's asked particularly that we talk about a garden, and my immediate thoughts were to one of my favourite hymns, one called I Walked in the Garden Alone. And I'm just going to read a few verses from that. I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses it. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I'm his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Yes, lovely place, lovely voices in the garden, there with Jesus, a peaceful place. And we talks of joy. But this week we think of one particular garden, the Garden of Gethsemane. And that was not a place of joy at the time. But nevertheless, the garden still, to me, is a wonderful place of joy. This last week I was in the garden, at the top of the garden, looking over Wedmore, seeing the church clock. And all of a sudden the phone rang down in the kitchen, and I ran down all the steps and picked up the phone, and there was my friend Roy. I first met Roy in 1958, over 60 years ago, and he's been a friend ever since. He's a real son of the soil. He's got a broad Hampshire accent. He's got very green fingers and can produce vegetables, always has, twice as big as anybody else, and nobody understands quite why. But that made me think, talking to Roy, of garden's influence in my life. And the first one I have comes when my granddad Gelder came to live with us when I was about 11 or 12 after his wife had died. And to be honest, my mother and he didn't always get on all that well. They rubbed along together okay, but it wasn't the happiest of relationships. And I always remember her getting very cross with my granddad, accusing him of corrupting me as he asked me to help him select the draws for his football pools. And she thought that was going to lead me into bad habits for life. But thankfully it never has. However, the main memory of my granddad was that of flowers and our garden in Southampton, which is a long, narrow garden, and he had the bottom end. And there he first of all grew lots of roses. And then, he won lots of prizes, but then he decided one year he'd instead grow chrysanthemums. And chrysanthemums were the big, incurving varieties, very big blooms for shows. And the love and attention that he gave was most impressive. It cost a small fortune. He bought paving slabs to go around all of the 4 beds so he could get at the chrysanthemums easily. He put protecting covers over all of them, and then spent pounds on John Innes compost to build the beds up, fresh every year. And again, I remember my mother complaining, "Oh, if only he gave me as much in housekeeping as he spent on those roses, I'd be well off." But of course he didn't. But his 100 or so chrysanthemums took a lot of patience. I always remember him there debudding them very carefully, so just 1 or 2 buds formed into these beautiful, perfect blooms. And of course his sacrifice of time, effort and money was actually quite well rewarded, because he won a cup at the RHS Chelsea Flower Show for one of his chrysanthemums, a proud moment in his life. Now, what's this got to do with Holy Week? Well, of course it's personal. The blooms he formed were absolutely perfect, and so they reminded me then and now in a way of Jesus, perfect man on earth through the grace of God. And Grandad spent all day nurturing his plants, just as God was always close at hand for Jesus in his ministry. He's also close at hand, of course, for us in nurturing us, if we choose. But in particular, God the Father was there during the trauma of Gethsemane. And trauma isn't too strong a word. We tend to think of Jesus suffering on the cross. But that week leading up to the cross, in particular in the Garden of Gethsemane, as he wrestled with his doubts, wrestled with his Father, wanting to be relieved of the burden of going to the cross. And at the end, of course, he did go to the cross with a bigger prize than an RHS award. It was the prize of everlasting life for all of us, for you and me. And again, reflecting on the skill and devotion my grandfather put into tending his blooms, it epitomizes for me the devotion I ought to spend preparing for Easter, preparing myself for heaven. It takes patience, it takes time, it takes all those virtues. And to be honest, the one I'm sadly lacking in at times is patience. It's not my strong point. I like things done today, now. I hate it when people tell me things 2 or 3 times. And when I was working, if I had to tell somebody 3 or 4 times to do something, then my patience really was tested. But that patience is nothing compared to that of Jesus in the garden, or Jesus throughout his ministry for that matter, because he told the disciples what would happen, but they hadn't grasped it. Comfort for me in the garden is when he showed his, was it impatience? Was it frustration? Was it disappointment? As he said to the disciples, could you not watch with me 1 hour? I take that to heart because I don't spend enough time in prayer, listening to Jesus, as that hymn referred to just now, walking with him, listening to him. And my modest knowledge of gardening, I don't know all the names of the plants, but I do enjoy being in the garden. Behind me, you may be able to see on the wall 2 very different gardens. One in Lee Wood, a very natural garden with all the bluebells painted by a Bristol painter, and the other one of Shipley Glen in Bradford, which was painted by my great-grandfather, and that's a much more natural nature scene, but a garden nevertheless, God's creation. And there, wherever I am in the garden, whether it would be back in my granddad's garden or here sitting up at the top of the garden, it's a time to listen to Jesus, a time to be not interrupted, a time of peace, a time to pray and, importantly, listen. Whether I'm digging, planting, or relaxing, that is a place where I can find Jesus. And I hope during this Easter week, each of us, perhaps because we're spending more time in the garden because of circumstances, or looking out of our windows at the gardens around us, can use this time just to reflect on what Jesus showed us and give thanks for his patience with the disciples and with us. The time he took sharing his troubles, his misgivings, his doubts with his Father, but nevertheless worked through in the garden his devotion to duty to God the Father as he went to the cross, preparing to die for us. And it's important just to close in this period of quite bad news and think about those who are facing untimely death in this current crisis. And we must pray that they will share in the joy of eternal life, the joy of the garden, the ultimate prize for which Jesus gave himself for us. And so may we too place ourselves in Jesus' hands in the week ahead, so that we all may join together next Sunday in front of our PCs, laptops, or tablets and join together in the joy of the resurrection in our Easter service next Sunday. So, thank you for just sharing these few thoughts with me. I appreciate it, and you send my love, and may God bless you all. Amen.